Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name is Christina Chandler, and I'm the placement coordinator for Concourse. I'm going to be starting off our webinar today about sports and athletics, everything you need to know about university sports and athletics. So a couple of housekeeping tips to get us started. We're going to be sharing these slides at the end of the presentation, so everybody will be able to download them and review the information or online resources. If you've got questions, you can leave them in the box on the right side of the screen, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. But if we run out of time, we will follow up via email. We'll also be using the terms athletics and sports interchangeably, as well as the terms college and university, as these have the same meaning in the United States. This presentation will also be recorded and available for viewing later. So as I said, we're going to be talking about college athletics and sports, and you've had an agenda there, and the moderators will be my colleague Marissa and myself. As I said, my name is Christina Chandler. I'm the placement coordinator for Concourse. Previously, I worked as the EducationUSA regional director for China and Mongolia. I've also had experience with teacher training, curriculum development, sports coaching, and teaching English, French, and history at the high school and university level in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and I'm currently based in Australia. Marissa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So my name is Marissa Gambardella, and I am the engagement coordinator for Concourse Global. My background is in international admissions and student recruitment, and I also have worked managing ESL programs and students. In addition to that, I am also proud to say that I was a former college athlete myself.
Great. Thank you, Marissa. For our presenters today, we have 4 panelists, 2 with EducationUSA and 2 with U.S. universities. Our first panelist is Katie Sleeman. Katie represents EducationUSA for the U.S. Embassy in New Zealand, and she's based in Auckland. She works to improve student mobility between the U.S. and New Zealand and guides 3 advising centers in the EducationUSA Global Network. Originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, also home to the NCAA headquarters, Katie grew up playing a range of sports. She holds a Bachelor of Science from Purdue University and a Master's of Commercialization and Entrepreneurship from the University of Auckland. Our second EducationUSA presenter is Samantha Jackson. Samantha is the EducationUSA Country Coordinator in Melbourne, Australia. She completed both her undergraduate and postgraduate degrees at Northern Illinois University in the United States and was on a full golf scholarship for her undergraduate studies. Samantha has worked in the higher education and secondary school sectors in Australia for more than 15 years. On the university side, we have Michael Drake. Michael was a high school golf state champion and was recruited to play golf at the collegiate level at Gordon College in Massachusetts, a Division III school. He then played competitive golf for several years after graduation. Michael coached high school golf for 3 years before moving to Chicago and coaching North Park University's men's and women's golf teams. He is now the Director of International Recruitment, working very closely with the coaches while they recruit international students for their athletic programs. Brian Arsenault was recruited to play basketball at the Division III level at Finlandia University in Michigan, and then graduated from Marquette University Law School in Wisconsin with a focus on sports law. Brian has worked as a compliance assistant at NCAA Division I Bradley University in Illinois, and is currently the Assistant Director of Compliance at the University of South Florida. In this role, he is the liaison between the coaches, the admissions office, and the Office of International Services, and he also facilitates the student-athlete certification with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Okay, let's move along, and we're going to start off with Katie presenting.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and hello, everyone. I think it's really interesting that the opportunity to play a sport on campus is really enriching for the whole student experience at American university campuses. But I want to say that it's also very valuable for students in terms of finding financial opportunities, but it certainly isn't the only way for students to find financial opportunities to attend university. We also wanted to say that this presentation is focused a lot on the formal process of becoming a student athlete on campus, but for students who might be more interested in social aspects of playing a sport or belonging to a team, they are welcome to join intramural sports or club sports on campuses as well, and that's not part of our presentation today. So in thinking about the big picture in terms of sporting opportunities on campus, we will introduce you to the major governing bodies. And really, they exist to serve and protect the student. So their priorities are in terms of fairness, creating an equal playing field, if you will, student well-being, and academics. Next slide, please. All right, so starting with the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. Now that's really the focus of most of our presentation today. It is the largest organization or governing body. So there are 24 sports in the NCAA and well over 1,100 colleges and universities subscribe to this organization. So the NCAA is broken into 3 different divisions, and as you can see, there are nearly 500,000 student athletes participating in NCAA sports. This is really popular in terms of scholarships, and of note, there's actually more than $3.3 billion for sports scholarships in the NCAA and affiliated universities. Moving on to the NAIA. So this organization really owns the space of small college athletics. So there are about 250 member schools belonging to the NAIA, and about 65,000 students participating in sport. So these, being in terms of the small college space, the average roll is about 1,700 students on campus. And oftentimes, these schools or universities are private and faith-based. There are scholarships available, and the sports offered are generally considered mainstream American sports, so fewer sports than what the NCAA offers. Next, we have the NJCAA, which really is in terms of the 2-year college space. So there are about 500 member schools belonging to the NJCAA. Competition is really varied, and keep in mind for your students as well that in order to complete a bachelor's degree, they'll need to transfer to another institution for that. So this is really popular in terms of 2+2 programs. So 2 years associate's degree, and then another 2 years at another institution to complete a bachelor's degree. From the New Zealand perspective, we're finding this as a very popular pathway right now for baseball and basketball players, but it certainly isn't limited to just those sports. Next slide, please. So the NCAA, as was mentioned, is the grunt of our presentation for you today. It's really designed to align like-minded campuses in terms of philosophy, competition, and opportunity. You see the 3 different divisions listed before you now. So starting with Division 1, a lot of people tend to refer to this as the big division. So everything is big in this division. Campuses usually have the biggest budgets, biggest stadiums, biggest teams. You typically see sports played on TV from this division. Also, they have the biggest campus sizes as well. So the average university or college in Division 1 has approximately 10,000 students on campus. And Division 1 is usually considered to have the highest level of competition or level of play as well. A fun fact about Division I is that the student athletes graduate at a higher rate than the general student body, so about 80%, which is pretty great. So Division II is really in terms of the medium-sized universities. So they average about 2,500 students on campus. And it's a pretty unique cultural experience too, because about 1 in 11 students on these Division II campuses actually play a sport. So everyone you meet on campus, 1 out of 11 of them would be playing on a sports team. The level of play can be similar to Division I, so it's generally believed that about Division II, the top level of Division II can be similar to the level of play in the bottom tier of Division I, so keep that in mind for your students. And it's a little bit more balanced in terms of practice time and study time. Now moving on to Division III, I just mentioned balance before, and honestly, the word that really screams to me when I think about Division III is really balance. So this is the vision where students have the opportunity to study and play and also have a life as well. So it is the largest division in the NCAA with about 450 member schools, and these tend to have the smallest campus sizes as well. About 1 in 6 students play a sport on these campus. So again, adding to that really sort of sporty vibe on campus. There are no scholarships to play a sport in this division. So I think it's oftentimes overlooked by students and families around the world just for that fact alone. But please note that there are other forms of aid available for those students to help facilitate that pathway for them. Next slide, please. So this really helps us in visualizing overall mobility and student flow. And keep in mind too that the numbers that we're seeing for the top 10 sending countries here, these are just numbers for Divisions I and II. So Division III doesn't require the same level of registration, and we can't track that sort of information. So this is just Divisions I and II. And keep in mind too that this is really just tip of the iceberg in terms of participation. We're seeing students coming from all over the world, so many different countries. In fact, there are over 20,000 international students currently participating in the NCAA right now. Next slide, please. So taking a closer look here, just so you can see the rise in participation, looking again just at Divisions I and II, where we can track the registration numbers, you see from 2010 to 2017, the numbers for Division I participation in terms of international students is now approaching 12%, which is huge. Division II, we're at over 6.5%. So again, those are some pretty significant numbers. If you delve even further, you can find out participation by sport, which is also really interesting. So if you look at, say, the sport that has the highest percentage of international students in Division I, it's actually tennis for both men and women. But alternatively, if you look for the biggest growth in international student participation for Division I sports, we're seeing basketball is on the rise for men, and field hockey is on the rise for women. And those are just examples. And again, we're seeing growth in every sport and students coming from all countries around the world. If you want to delve further into this and what it looks like, all of this information is actually publicly available for you on the NCAA website. And while you're there, I wanted to flag that there are 2 really important things that you should be bookmarking as you talk to students and parents down the line. And those 2 things are the Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete and the International Standards Guide as well. So now I'm going to pass it over to Samantha for an overview of NCAA sports.
Thanks, Katie. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Samantha, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to say good day to everyone out there, with our friends in the region of the Southern Hemisphere and also where you are in the world. Katie mentioned the College Bound Student Athlete Guide, and that brings us to our next slide. Is it from a school counselor perspective? When a student comes to you, it's always important that you come back to the reality check. So if you can go to the slide before me, and look at the NCAA sports. First thing, it's really important that a student athlete who comes to you has their sport on the list. Right now, we're looking at the NCAA sport list. And if they're there, then that's fantastic. And you can continue to guide them in that approach. And it's okay to be the reality check that most student athletes will come with possibly the aspiration of NCAA sports because that's the one that they hear more about. And it's really important for you to note, how good are they? Are they representing their current countries? Are they representing their state, territory, or region? So that's really important. So now if we can move to the next slide. Again, spoken to a little bit by Katie as well, is that there are so many scholarships and money available in the divisions, and it's over $3 billion. But obviously, not everyone is going to be successful in getting a scholarship. And I think sometimes it's important to see that, for Division 1, that's just over 50%. And obviously, similarly for Division 2 as well. You'll see the 80% bar at Division 3. Obviously, that is not a sports scholarship. That is often an academic or merit-based scholarship. But obviously, there are some great opportunities in regards to that and where a student finds their best fit. Next slide, please. So then we start getting to the nuts and bolts and obviously the eligibility requirements. In regards to the three associations, they clearly stipulate what their eligibility requirements are. And obviously, what's really important to note here is that these organizations, I often call them the front porches. They don't want to keep student athletes out. They just want to make sure that they can be successful. So the benchmarks are relatively quite low in regards to what the entrance requirements are. But it's always important to note, obviously, where the starting gauge is. Now, we're going to talk more about the eligibility for NCAA Division 1. And obviously, the 16 core courses in regards to a student athlete meeting that is what a high school teacher or counselor or whatever role you're in has to obviously look at addressing. And we have found through our region that if you can understand the 16 core courses, then that becomes really one of the major things to help you with that process. So if we can go to the next slide, please, where we can drill down on that NCAA Division 1 and the 16 core subjects. It looks probably quite complicated, yet very simple. 4 years in English, and I will give you the example. 4 years refers to in your last 4 years of high school. So in Australia, that would be year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12. So that's what it's referring to in the breakdown. Now, these courses need to be taught at university college entrance. And obviously, then you need to obviously match them to the student. The earlier the student can come to you, the greater. We know that students aren't organised, and I'm sorry to all my high school staff around the world. If they could be well prepared, that would make our life a whole lot easier. But if they came to us in year 9, then we can obviously map the 16 cores a whole lot earlier. And that doesn't mean if they come to you after year 9, it's a deal breaker. It just means it's something that they need to obviously be very cognizant of, that they make sure they meet that. Now, as a school counsellor, it's always really important to know is that the student and the families need to be the driver in this. You should never feel that it's your responsibility and your responsibility alone. Obviously, you're an important co-driver, and that's obviously very important. But please feel that, there are organizations, EducationUSA, countries around the world, and organizations like Concourse that are there to help with resources. If we can move to the next slide, that would be great. So obviously, in regards to NCAA eligibility, once a student probably realizes that this is a pathway that they are aspiring to, connecting with the NCAA Eligibility Center at the earliest convenience is a great suggestion. Students can actually set up a free profile with the NCAA Eligibility Center, which costs them nothing. It will generate their NCAA eligibility ID number. It will take about 45 minutes to actually populate all those sections there that we're referring to, the email address, the demographic, the education history. And when they're in the system with the NCAA Eligibility Center, they will then be emailed in regards to where they should be in the timeline, okay? Which means that can keep them on track in regards to what they're doing. In regards to the NCAA Eligibility Center, yes, they're required to do an ACT and an SAT test and a result. And obviously, when they register for those tests, they can send their results as part of the free package to either NCAA or albeit the NAIA as well. Now, as I said, the entry mark for the NCAA has a relatively low bar. So it's important that a student athlete that wants to obviously attend a US college may meet the SAT, ACT, NCAA requirement, but you need to also make sure that that meets the academic rigor of the schools they want to obviously apply to as well. And it's obviously quite a few steps in the process. The required items I've already discussed, the SAT scores. They'll need their official transcripts from the last 4 years of their high school. So in Australia, that's years 9, 10, 11, and 12. If you are coming from a country where English is not the first language, that will need to obviously be translated to English and a certified copy. And when they get later down the process, and generally it's April 1 before the year they be recruited, then they'll obviously finish the amateurism questionnaire as well. And there is an application fee. If you're an international student, currently that's set at $150 US. If you pay that this year and you're in year 9, then if it goes up in the future years, then obviously you can save some money in that regard too. So once you obviously hit the NCAA eligibility and you move through that process, it gives me absolute pleasure to pass it on to our next specialist in the chain, and they're going to talk about timelines and registration. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie and Samantha. So as Samantha said, we're going to be passing things over to the university athletics side of things, and we're going to start it off with Michael Drake from North Park.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, I want to first preface this timeline and say that it's a really good framework, but depending on the level of program you're looking for, whether you're looking at Division 1, 2, 3, junior college, or NAIA, that this timeline may differ slightly. And then within each individual division, the competitiveness of the program can alter the timeline as well. So for year 1, I would start by really setting realistic expectations of the student's playing ability. This is where a lot of families can find disappointment in the process. So having some professional opinions, people that are familiar with the process, do an evaluation of a student, I think is really important. Understand the differences between Division 1 to Division 3, junior college, and NAIA. Understand what the quality of life is like as a student athlete at each respected division. But also it's important to understand where these coaches are recruiting, not necessarily physically, but also virtually, where they're looking for recruits. That way the student can be strategic as they're planning ahead in their recruitment efforts. Developing a highlight reel is extremely important. If you want a response from a coach, you're going to need evidence of your ability. So depending on the sport will determine what the highlight reel should look like. Game footage for basketball, football, extremely important. If you're looking at sports such as baseball, golf, tennis, coaches aren't overly interested in game footage. They're more interested in skills footage. And then obviously with sports like track and swimming, where they're timed events, having times is critical to getting the coach's attention. And the times should not be students out with their friends running around the track. They should be coming from live events. Year 2 is when you're going to want to register with the eligibility center, the respected eligibility center for the program you're looking for. Really, you're going to want to start developing independent study and practice schedules, so you can start working on that balance. It can be a very difficult adjustment for students going from high school into university as student athletes. So beginning to work on that's really important as well. And then get in front of coaches. So start submitting your highlight videos. Try to get to tournaments that coaches might be at if possible, and really taking advantage of virtual platforms to do this. Year 3, you should really start narrowing that list of colleges. Really start communicating with colleges at all levels, so you're casting a large net. And I would start looking at the rosters of the various schools that students might be interested in, because that can help guide your recruitment efforts as well. And obviously you want to be taking the SAT and the ACT, and regardless of whether the SAT is optional for the particular universities that the student is looking at, you're going to want to take that anyways, because it will be required for eligibility centers. And then year 4, obviously you need to start applying for the schools. That's critical. Do it early. Be aware of early action and early decision restrictions. You can take the SAT or the ACT as many times as necessary. So if you feel like you need to retake the score, the student needs to retake the test for a better score, be sure to do that. And then I would also continue to be getting in front of coaches. That's such an important piece of this whole process. And then I would also make a point to have a backup plan, because things don't always play out as expected. So when you're casting that large net early on in your communication efforts and in your research efforts, make sure you're developing that backup plan so you can enact it if necessary come year 4. Thank you all very much.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Brian Arsenault, and I work at the University of South Florida. So I'm going to go through a little bit more of the process from the coaching side and from the athletic side of what happens in that timeline. So the process on our side begins with the coaching staff. They're the ones that are sorting through and reviewing prospects and watching all the film and highlight tapes that players have sent over to them. They're also going to competitions and trying to scout in that regard. And they're getting a lot of information from other people, like counselors, from high school coaches, and from other people in that sport that they trust and that they believe their opinion on. So what they're going to start doing is they're going to start by collecting a lot of academic information on these student athletes to see if they can meet the educational requirements of the institution and of the NCAA. So what they'll start looking for is the transcripts and the test scores from the first 3 years of education. And they'll also begin evaluating the recruits. And they can start evaluating recruits pretty much at any age. But as it got brought up earlier in the discussion, they cannot make outgoing calls to the students until their 3rd year, September 1st of their 3rd year. They can receive calls from the students at any time, but they cannot make outgoing calls until that September 1st date. So once they have collected some academic information that they usually will get from a counselor or from the student themselves, they'll bring that information over to someone like me in the compliance office. And what we will do is at that point, we will search for the student on the NCAA's Eligibility Center site. When the student's created a profile, we can search for them directly in the website, and we can find their academic profile that they have created online. And what we will do is we will start by evaluating their NCAA eligibility and seeing where they're at in those 16 core courses, seeing where they're at for an NCAA GPA, and seeing what their test score looks like. We'll kind of share that information with our coaches, and in the meantime, we'll also send that information over to the admissions office so that they can start evaluating the student for their admissibility as well. And once we get the reports on those two, we'll get an NCAA initial eligibility evaluation and the academic admissions evaluation from across campus. We'll share that information with the head coach, who will then be relaying that information back to the student athlete and giving them the information that they have on missing documentation, any registration issues that they have that may come up, and where they're at in terms of what they need to finish out their 16 core courses, what they need for a GPA to go with their test score, or any other relevant information that might have to do with their amateurism or otherwise their academic certification. And so essentially, once the student has registered with the Eligibility Center and they've been put on an IRL, which is the institutional request list, and they've sent a transcript over to the institution, they can then come on an official visit to campus. And so that's where the coach will invite them over. And an official visit basically is just a paid visit where the school that is recruiting the student will pay for either part or the entire visit over to come visit campus. And those visits as well can only happen after the September 1st date of the third year of schooling. And on those visits, the school will usually provide the transportation, they'll provide lodging, they'll provide meals, and they can also provide some limited entertainment, like being able to attend a game on campus or something like that. And those limits are limited from the NCAA as to what they can do on those visits. But it's important to note that to come on the visit and also after that point to sign an NLI or to sign which is the grant and aid, and basically a contract locking the student and the institution into a 1-year contract. Those both require the student to be registered on the IRL with the Eligibility Center to have those both occur. So if anyone has any questions on that process from our end, I look forward to answering those questions. And I think at this point, we can kind of move on to the next section.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michael and Brian. So I think now we are going to open things up for some questions. We have had a few come in throughout the webinar, so we're going to kind of dive in. I'm going to leave on Brian, Michael, and Samantha to help kind of field and answer all of these questions. So very first question, do students need a highlight reel before they start reaching out to coaches?
I would say it's important to have a highlight reel before that process starts, because you're giving a coach a good idea of what level the student is competing at, so they're using their time more efficiently as they're recruiting. But it's not essential. And I would also mention that the highlight reel should be fluid. So as the student is developing physically over time, their skills are developing over time, so too should the actual highlight reel. That should be developing as well and improving.
Yeah, and if I can pitch in on that as well, I know a lot of our coaches, when they have looked at highlight reels, one of the things that they mention is to keep it semi-brief, generally under 2 minutes, and just show your best highlights from your playing days. You don't need to make an extensive video. A lot of the times they just want a shorter video to show exactly what the student's able to do on the athletic field.
And from an EducationUSA perspective, what we often share with students, obviously from Australia, is that you've probably got to work harder in creating your profile. The coaches inevitably are never probably going to see you play in your own country. So creating a highlight reel, becomes really important. Not sending it to email boxes. It needs to be linked from websites, which kids are really clever at doing right now. And I know they're talking about not having game footage, but if you also have that on your own page, coaches can kind of skim through that in about 5 to 6 minutes and know if you can play or not.
Okay. Great, all great answers. Thank you. Okay, next question. Can a student play multiple sports at the university level?
I'll start in referencing Division III, and this is very common actually for our athletes to be competing in multiple sports. Typically, if the student was heavily recruited by one particular sport, that coach might be protective over the student, so they're going to protect them against threat of injury if they're participating in another sport. So students should discuss this with their coaches if they're at the Division III level in advance before they commit to competing in another sport.
And on the Division I level, yes, students can compete in multiple sports. It's less common just because the level is a little bit higher, and so it's difficult to be at that level for both sports. But in the cases where a student is capable of playing both, it definitely can happen. They're both. You're given 4 years of eligibility for both sports as well. So there have been cases where you have student athletes who have played basketball for 4 years and they still have 1 year to compete. So they'll compete in basketball for the last year of their eligibility. So it can definitely happen. It's just a matter of at the Division I level of being able to do it effectively.
Okay, great. Okay, Samantha, I think I have a perfect question for you. So what advice would you give to a counselor who has never worked with an international student athlete before? What should their first step be?
Don't run away would be my first suggestion. Know that there's resources out there. If you aren't connected with Education USA in your countries, then that's probably a first place. But even if you connect to your EduUSA country, if they are not obviously experienced or had a lot of experience in that student athlete piece, then make sure you reconnect as well. And I would also say print out the College Bound Student Guide because it's just a great reference piece that is always obviously has that list of what you can do as a school counsellor.
Let's see. I think, Brian, we had a couple questions that came in specifically about official visits. Is an official visit common, particularly for international students?
Yes, official visits are common for international students. Since it's a little bit more difficult to get them to come over multiple times throughout the year, what will happen a lot of times is there 4 universities or 3 universities we're all recruiting the same student will actually communicate with each other and schedule the trip to go from one to the next school so that you can kind of knock them all out in a week. But yeah, we recruit a lot of international students at our campus, and so we very often have a lot of students flying in for official visits and then usually flying on to another destination after they leave our campus.
That's interesting. I actually have a question stemming off of that. Is that common for Division 1, 2, and 3, or is this something that's usually more common only for Division 1?
I'm not 100% sure on Division 2 or 3 how with their budgets and what they're able to pay for in regards to visits and things like that. I know, like I said, Division 1, we are pretty accustomed to having international students come over, and it helps to share the cost in that regard then, because you're not paying for a flight there and back. You're paying maybe for a one-way flight, and then the next school will pay for them to fly to the next institution or something like that. But so it probably just depends on the budget for Division 2, and I don't know if Division 3 does official visits or not.
Okay.
Yeah, for the Division III level, I think it is less common. Where North Park is located in Chicago and O'Hare is a big hub, we do see a handful of international students, particularly athletes, visiting each year. But I would say it's far less common at the Division III level.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting with this as well is it kind of, for parents and students, I think they realize that this is a competitive process. So all of a sudden, 4 or 5 institutions know they're all vying for the one person, which kind of goes against the mindset that a student thinks they're being recruited in isolation. And often they're not if they're a Division 1 and national athlete in their home countries. So I think it's just something to be open to. that US colleges are aware that you're going to obviously try and find your best fit institution. And that should always be the number one criteria as well.
Exactly. I think, Brian, I think another question for you. Someone asked, is the NLI that you mentioned, is that binding?
Yes, it is binding for a period of 1 year. So it's binding on our end to give that student their scholarship if they attend our institution, and it's binding on their end to compete for our institution for 1 year I think it's just a 1 year NLI, but it is a binding, basically a binding contract. Yes.
Okay, and can you repeat again? What does the NLI stand for?
It is the National Letter of Intent.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you're basically by signing that, you're stating that you're intending to attend that institution, and it creates a restriction on recruiting that particular individual at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I think here's another question for Michael and Brian. How is recruiting an international student athlete different than a domestic athlete? And are there extra steps or more steps that the coaches need to follow?
It can be different. It kind of just depends on the country that you're recruiting the kid from, because certain countries we get used to dealing with more often than not, and the NCAA has actually changed their evaluation technique for international countries now. So they treat them a lot more like a domestic kid with the 16 core courses, whereas in the past they used to go based solely off of certificate results at the end of your educational period. So in a lot of ways, it's getting a lot more like recruiting a domestic kid, but you still have certain difficulties with just sometimes reaching a counselor or finding the right transcript that you need, or just different educational systems that create unique situations you have to kind of work through.
At the Division III level, I think the process is really quite similar. Obviously, the visa component is the variable for the international student. I'm finding at North Park, our coaches are becoming more and more familiar with various clubs and organizations outside of the U.S., so they're able to evaluate the skills of the players that they're recruiting a little more accurately. So it's just requiring a little more research on the coaches' side, but we're also seeing some of our coaches using their budget to travel internationally to see some of the players in person that they're really interested in, or becoming more familiar with the clubs that some of their students are coming from.
And if I can add, I think student athletes that are obviously based outside of North America, I think you need to acknowledge that some coaches may see you as being more of a risk that they want to obviously bring you across, and they're going to obviously possibly invest scholarship money. But, if you use your sports profile and can talk about the support and the resilience you have, that you're actually committed to the long haul, and realize that it's an investment of time, and you're coming with the support of your family. I think that helps in creating your profile as well, in regards to you being a good candidate for programs.
Great, thank you, everyone. This question, I think, stems off of something that Samantha, you had said before about playing for a national team. If my student has played for a national team, does that violate the NCAA's amateurism requirement? So I know that the NCAA.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to my university colleagues first, and then I'll come back maybe at the tail end. But no, it wouldn't. But I'm going to let them respond with the official jargon, and I'll help you at the end as well.
Sounds good.
Correct. Yeah, it would not violate amateurism rules. And previously, national team participation with the senior national team was the only thing that would be allowed under the amateurism rules, but they've actually opened it up a little bit more recently to allow for U20 and U18 team participation as well. But as long as the student athlete's only really receiving actual and necessary expenses or reasonable benefits associated with their national team practice or competition, there's really no issue with that participation.
So what I'm going to add to that is that if you're on a national team, what's probably really important as a family is that any trips you go on, let's just say they pay for you to go to Europe, what you really have to do is make sure that you keep really good, strong financial records that you can throw in an Excel spreadsheet in regards to trips you go on and receipts that you have, because the NCAA can ask you for that kind of information. And that's still okay, but they just want to make sure where all those costs are coming from. And again, that won't violate your amateurism either. But if you are an elite athlete and have a lot of out of the country transportation and travel, that's probably something that you should just be proactive in keeping really good documentation on.
Okay, great. Thank you again, everyone. I think we have time for a few more questions. Are students able to receive athletic and academic scholarships, or is it only one or the other?
A coach is going to love you if you have academic strong grades, and you can get some academic scholarship that can obviously combine with your athletic scholarship. So the answer is absolutely yes, you can receive both, but it can only equate to 100% in regards to you can't get 150% and put 50% in your savings account.
Good answer. Great. Let's see. Here's a question. What is a walk-on? And can students who try out as a walk-on still receive athletic scholarship? I don't know, maybe Michael or Brian want to take that one.
Yeah. A walk-on can be a couple of different things. So it can be a true tryout walk-on student where they're just a student at the institution that wasn't really recruited to go there. And they went to a tryout usually early in the year and could make the team through that way. But also a lot of times coaches will use the term walk-on when they're just talking about a non-scholarship player, where they're being recruited by the institution and they would have a spot on the team if they chose to attend an institution, but they just wouldn't be on scholarship. To answer the second part of the question, if a walk-on player could eventually get a scholarship, yes, and that has happened at some point. Different times, it kind of just depends on if the coach feels like that person's contribution to the team is something that they feel like they need to reward that person with a scholarship at a later date. But it can mean a couple different things.
On a whole, though, most international students are probably not going to be able to access the walk-on element, because obviously they won't commit to a university if they can't afford to go there as well. They could still do it if they go to an institution for academic entrance, and then a walk-on can happen. But generally speaking, this doesn't really impact many international students.
Okay, thank you. One last question. If my student needs ESL, can they still be an athlete? So if the student still needs to complete maybe English proficiency, are they still able to participate in sports?
They can, as far as completing an actual ESL course in their fall semester. I know certain institutions won't treat those as 4-credit courses, so they would have to make sure that they're still meeting the full-time enrollment aspect of it. Or the other thing that comes up a lot is we'll have just the English proficiency as a requirement to get into the institution. So they'll have to meet that actually before they even actually get admitted to the institution. We have that at USF for students from non-English speaking countries, where they either have to complete a TOEFL or show English proficiency through like an English composition course prior to enrolling here at USF.
Yeah, at North Park, as long as they're maintaining full-time status in their classroom, they're able to participate in athletics.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for your participation and for sharing all of your questions with us. While we do have a few more questions that came in, we want to be respectful of all of your time and to keep this webinar within the bounds of the hour. So we can and will follow up via email and get those questions answered for you. But for now, we do have a few more brief topics that we just want to cover before we wrap up. Resources. So as Christina mentioned, at the very end of the webinar, we are going to be sharing the slides from this presentation with you all. When I do, you'll see a button pop up on the top right of your screen that should allow you to click in to download all of the slides that you've seen. And then within those slides, all of the items on this page here are going to be linked. And we've also included live links all throughout the slides. So as you're reading through those downloaded slides, you're going to come across even more links and more resources. So we have the links to all of the eligibility pages here for the various athletic associations. And then you'll see at the bottom, we have some other resources. So the link to the EducationUSA website will help you to locate any office that's closest to you if you have any direct questions for them. A big shout out again, thank you so much to Katie and Samantha for joining our webinar today. EducationUSA is really a wonderful resource for counselors and students who are looking towards the US for higher ed. So we are very excited to have had you both here and to help us present this information. And then these, the final two resources I'm going to spend just a few more minutes on. So the C4, the Common College Counseling Curriculum, or C4 for short, is something that the Concourse Global has been working on and collaborating with high school counselors and university reps. Many of you might have seen the blog post that we recently published that goes over the C4 a little bit, or maybe you participated in the original webinar that we had when we were launching it. But for those of you who are not familiar with the C4, essentially, it's a free open source resource for college counselors. Let me just drop the link here. Perfect. So you should all see in the top right of your screen that it's a link that will bring you directly to the C4 wiki. And I really encourage you all to check it out. When you do, you'll see that the C4 has month-to-month breakdowns of activities for students in their final years of secondary education. We've gone and broken it down even beyond that based on their desired destinations. And we have things like pages devoted completely to summer programs and resources. But beyond just letting you know how amazing we think the C4 is, which of course we do, this is really an invitation to you all, as well as the entire international education community, for collaboration. So at Concourse, we are true believers in access and providing students and counselors with opportunities and resources. Even just using this webinar as kind of an example, bringing people together to pool their knowledge, it really betters our entire industry. And to accomplish this, collaboration is so key. So beyond checking out the C4, we strongly encourage everyone to contribute. It could be the addition of maybe a location that you have particular expertise in, but it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be just a sentence, a resource, or an activity that could really be invaluable to a brand new counselor to the field or somebody who's less resourced or doesn't have a really strong network. I'm going to be dropping a link to this webinar, the recording, into our sports and athletics page, but I really encourage you all to create a login and do kind of what we think this industry does so well, which is to collaborate. Okay, and last but certainly not least, I just wanted to take a moment to plug this awesome organization that Christina and I are lucky enough to be a part of. So very briefly, Concourse Global is an online tool for counselors that's designed to help find higher education opportunities anywhere in the world that are a personal, academic, and financial fit for students. So Concourse gives you a team of on-demand academic specialists, many of whom are former high school counselors, like so many of you are, and admissions officers as well. And they each have different regional expertise all over the globe. And they work to find best matched university opportunities for your students, regardless of where or what they'd like to study. Concourse is also able to offer a really unique feature that allows universities to discover and interact with your students in a spam-free and really transparent environment without compromising their privacy, which is so important. And beyond helping counselors find these higher education opportunities for their students, Concourse is also able to assist with application and document management too. And we're very excited to announce that we're in the process of building Parchment integration. So that feature will be live on the platform in the very near future. And in keeping with our commitment to access, Concourse is completely free for high school counselors and students. So if you are interested and would like a counselor account, please visit our website. In the downloaded version of the slide, you'll be able to click this entire slide, I think is a live link to our website, or you can contact myself or Christina directly, and our emails addresses are listed right on this slide here. Perfect. Okay, great. I think that about wraps everything up. Thank you all so much for your time, and a huge, huge thank you to our incredible panelists for their time today as well. It was great to hear from you all and to learn from your expertise, so thank you all so very much. Everyone should now see the button in the top right of your screen that will allow you to download all of the slides that we used today, and that includes all of the live links to all of the great resources that we're providing. Be sure also to follow us on Facebook using the link that you see here on this page. That's normally where we post about any new or upcoming webinars. So thank you all so very much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great weekend.